From a director who nearly fainted over a mannequin prank to 3 mental patients who accidentally escaped during filming, Otto Preminger's biblical epic holds secrets that are stranger than fiction. With blacklisted writers working in secret, ships painted with fake rust, and a 15-year-old actress who became Broadway royalty, this Hollywood blockbuster concealed bizarre production stories, casting controversies, and behind-the-scenes chaos that rivaled any dramatic plot. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about Exodus. Fact 1. 3 mental patients accidentally escaped. When Otto Preminger was filming the dramatic prison break sequence at the ancient Acre Fortress in Israel, his production team hired exactly 250 local extras to play the role of Jewish prisoners, making their daring escape from British custody. The scene was meant to be one of the film's most spectacular moments, showing hundreds of political prisoners flooding out of the historic fortress in a carefully choreographed sequence that would capture the desperation and hope of the Jewish independence movement. The extras were given their instructions and positioned throughout the fortress, with cameras rolling to capture what was supposed to be a controlled but realistic-looking mass escape. The production crew had meticulously planned every detail of the sequence, from the timing of the breakout to the routes the fake prisoners would take as they fled the imposing stone walls of the fortress. When the cameras stopped rolling and the assistant directors began counting the extras to make sure everyone was accounted for, they discovered something completely unexpected. Instead of the 250 extras they had hired, the count revealed that 253 people had participated in the escape scene. 3 additional individuals had somehow joined the crowd of fleeing prisoners without anyone on the production team noticing. It turned out that these 3 unexpected participants were not hired extras at all, but actual patients who had escaped from a nearby mental health facility. They had apparently seen the commotion and crowds at the fortress and decided to blend in with the fake prison break, running alongside the paid extras as they fled through the ancient corridors and out into the courtyard. The 3 patients had managed to go completely undetected during the entire filming process, and their presence was only discovered during the final head count when the production team realized they had 3 more people than they had started with. Fact 2. Paul Newman's mannequin prank nearly killed Preminger. The relationship between Paul Newman and director Otto Preminger during the filming of Exodus was anything but smooth, and their conflicts eventually led to one of the most dangerous practical jokes in Hollywood history. Newman, who was already an established star by 1960, had developed his own ideas about how certain scenes should be played and had specific suggestions for improving the script. However, when he approached Preminger with these creative input ideas, the notoriously demanding director not only rejected Newman's suggestions outright, but also gave the actor a harsh public dressing down in front of the entire cast and crew. This public humiliation didn't sit well with Newman, who was known for his mischievous sense of humor and wasn't about to let Preminger's treatment go unanswered. The perfect opportunity for revenge came when they were filming a dramatic fight scene that required Newman to perform on a high balcony, overlooking a significant drop. Before the cameras rolled, Newman secretly positioned a mannequin on the balcony where he would be acting, carefully hiding it from the view of Preminger and the film crew below. When it came time to shoot the scene, Newman performed his part as directed, but at the crucial moment when the fight was supposed to reach its climax, he pretended to stumble and lose his balance. As he appeared to fall, Newman quickly grabbed the hidden mannequin and threw it over the balcony's edge, making it look as though he had actually plummeted from the dangerous height. From Preminger's perspective on the ground, it appeared that his leading man had just fallen to what would certainly be his death. The director was so shocked by what he believed was Newman's fatal accident that he immediately collapsed and required medical attention from the on-set medics. Only after Preminger had been revived did Newman reveal that the whole incident had been an elaborate, practical joke designed to get back at the director for his earlier public embarrassment. Fact 3. The ship got expensively fake rust treatment. One of the most important props in Exodus was the refugee ship that would carry 611 Jewish survivors from Cyprus to Palestine in the film's central storyline. The vessel needed to look like it had seen better days, appearing weathered and worn from years of hard use as a cargo ship that had been hastily converted to transport desperate refugees across dangerous waters. Otto Preminger's production team knew that finding the right ship would be crucial to making the dramatic scenes believable, so they searched for a vessel that would look authentic on camera. When they finally located a suitable ship and completed the purchase, the production company was delighted that the sellers had gone above and beyond to prepare the vessel for its new owners. The ship arrived at the filming location with a beautiful, gleaming, fresh coat of paint that made it look almost brand new. The sellers had clearly taken pride in delivering the ship in pristine condition, thinking they were doing the film production a favor by presenting them with a vessel that looked spotless and well-maintained. However, this thoughtful gesture created an expensive problem for the movie makers. The story of Exodus required the ship to look like a desperate refugee vessel that had been cobbled together from whatever materials were available, not a pristine passenger liner that looked like it had just rolled out of a shipyard. The fresh paint job was completely wrong for what the script called for, and there was no way the gleaming vessel would convince audiences that it was carrying desperate Holocaust survivors on a dangerous journey to their promised land. The production team had no choice but to hire painters to come in and artificially age the ship, applying layers of fake rust, weathering effects, and intentional wear patterns to make it look appropriately worn down and desperate. This process of making a perfectly good ship look terrible, again, cost the production a significant amount of money that hadn't been budgeted for the project. Fact 4. Dalton Trumbo wrote the script without visiting Israel. Dalton Trumbo, the blacklisted screenwriter hired to adapt Leon Uris's massive novel into a workable screenplay, faced a significant challenge that went beyond the usual difficulties of condensing a 600-page book into a 3.5-hour movie. Trumbo had never actually set foot in Israel or any of the Middle Eastern locations where the dramatic events of the story were supposed to take place, which meant he was writing about geography, landscapes, and locations based entirely on his reading and research, rather than personal experience. This lack of first-hand knowledge of the region led to some embarrassing geographical mistakes that had to be corrected during the production process. The most glaring error involved one of the film's most important sequences, the dramatic prison break at the ancient fortress of Acre. In Trumbo's original screenplay, he had written this crucial scene as taking place in a desert setting, apparently imagining the prison as being located in some remote, sandy wasteland far from civilization. The problem with this creative choice was that Acre is actually a coastal city that sits right on the Mediterranean Sea, surrounded by water rather than sand dunes. The historic fortress where Jewish political prisoners were actually held by the British authorities was built as a seaside fortification, with the ocean waves literally lapping at its ancient stone walls. Trumbo's vision of prisoners escaping across desert landscapes was not only historically inaccurate, but also completely wrong from a basic geographical standpoint. When Otto Preminger and the production team arrived in Israel to scout locations and begin filming, they quickly discovered Trumbo's mistake and had to revise the screenplay to match the actual physical reality of where these events had taken place. This geographical confusion was just one example of how Trumbo's lack of direct experience with the locations created additional work for the production team, who had to serve as fact-checkers and geographical consultants for their own screenwriter. Fact 5. The screenplay was written in just 40 days. When Otto Preminger decided to adapt Leon Uris's best-selling novel Exodus into a major motion picture, he faced the daunting task of turning a massive 624-page book into a workable screenplay that could capture the epic scope of the story while still being practical to film. The novel covered decades of Jewish history, multiple generations of characters, and complex political situations across several countries, making it one of the most challenging adaptation projects in Hollywood at the time. After rejecting the original author's screenplay as too one-sided and firing another writer whose script ran to 400 pages, Preminger turned to Dalton Trumbo, the blacklisted screenwriter who was just beginning to work under his own name again after years of using pseudonyms. Preminger sent Trumbo a telegram that simply read, "By Exodus. I will arrive December 16th. And the two men immediately began one of the most intensive collaborative writing processes in film history, working together in what Trumbo later described as a marathon of creativity. The director and screenwriter managed to complete the entire screenplay for this epic film in just 40 days. This meant they were averaging roughly 4 pages of finished script per day, which is an extraordinary pace for any writing project, let alone one that had to distill such a complex and sprawling source material into a coherent dramatic narrative. Trumbo later said that despite the intense pressure and breakneck speed of their collaboration, he had more pleasure working with Otto Preminger than with anyone else in his entire career. He described their partnership as involving more fun, more amusement, more tact, and of course, more hard work than any other project he had been involved with during his decades in Hollywood. The 40-day sprint resulted in a screenplay that successfully condensed the novel's epic scope into a 3.5-hour film that became one of the most successful movies of 1960. Fact 6. 5-year-old Jill Howarth was cast from a magazine photo. Otto Preminger's search for the perfect actress to play Karen Hansen, the young Danish-Jewish refugee who becomes central to the film's emotional storyline, turned into one of the most extensive casting processes in Hollywood history. The demanding director and his casting team looked at photographs and audition tapes from hundreds of young actresses from around the world, trying to find someone who could convincingly portray both the innocence of youth and the trauma of a Holocaust survivor who had lost her entire family. After months of searching through headshots, screen tests, and recommendations from talent agents across Europe and America, Preminger finally found what he was looking for in the most unexpected place. While flipping through a British modeling magazine that featured students from the Corona Theatre School, his attention was caught by a photograph of a 15-year-old girl named Jill Howarth. Something about her face and expression convinced him that she had the right combination of vulnerability and strength that the character required. Howarth, who was born Valerie Jill Howarth in Sussex, England, had been attending the Corona Theatre School but wasn't particularly focused on becoming a professional actress at that point in her young life. When Preminger's representatives contacted the school about arranging an audition, Howarth agreed to participate, but not because she was desperately seeking stardom or dreaming of Hollywood fame. Instead, her primary motivation for attending the audition was much more practical and typical of a teenager. She wanted to get out of her regular school classes for the day. Despite her casual attitude toward the audition process, Howarth impressed Preminger enough during her screen tests that he decided to cast her in what would become her breakthrough role. The 15-year-old British schoolgirl suddenly found herself playing opposite major Hollywood stars like Paul Newman and Sal Mineo in one of the biggest budget films of 1960. Fact 7. British authorities provided armed guards for fake weapons. When Otto Preminger chose to film key scenes of Exodus on the Mediterranean island of Cyprus, he was seeking authentic locations where the real events had actually taken place, since Cyprus had been the site of British internment camps for Jewish refugees trying to reach Palestine after World War II. However, the timing of the production created serious complications because Cyprus was in the middle of a violent Greek nationalist insurgency against British colonial rule, led by a group called EOKA, that the British authorities considered a dangerous terrorist organization. The British colonial government was deeply suspicious of Preminger's film project because they believed the movie's storyline about successful resistance against British authority might encourage the Greek rebels and provide them with propaganda materials. The plot of Exodus showed Jewish fighters using guerrilla tactics and acts of sabotage to force the British to change their policies, which was uncomfortably similar to what EOKA was attempting to accomplish with their own campaign of violence and intimidation against British rule in Cyprus. Because of these concerns, the British authorities refused to provide any logistical support or assistance to the film production, leaving Preminger's team to handle transportation, security, and other practical matters entirely on their own. The colonial government made it clear that they did not want to be seen as helping to create a movie that might glorify anti-British resistance movements or suggest that terrorism could be an effective political strategy. However, there was one very specific exception to this policy of non-cooperation. The production had brought a large number of decommissioned rifles to use as props in the various battle and military scenes throughout the film. Even though these weapons had been rendered completely inoperable and posed no actual threat to anyone, the British authorities were terrified that the guns might somehow fall into the hands of EOKA fighters who could potentially restore them to working condition. As a result, the only assistance the British provided was posting armed guards whose sole job was to watch over the fake weapons around the clock. Fact 8. Mort Sahl's legendary premiere interruption. The Hollywood premiere of Exodus was meant to be one of the most prestigious film events of 1960, with Otto Preminger and United Artists expecting the epic movie to receive the kind of respectful, irreverent reception that befitted such an important and serious historical drama. The packed theater was filled with industry executives, celebrities, critics, and other VIPs who had come to witness what was being promoted as one of the most significant films ever made about the founding of the modern state of Israel. However, as the evening wore on and the film continued to unfold on the big screen, it became increasingly clear to everyone in attendance that Exodus was going to be a much longer experience than most people had anticipated. The movie clocked in at 3 hours and 28 minutes, making it one of the longest films ever released by a major Hollywood studio and the pacing was deliberately slow and methodical, as Preminger tried to give proper weight to all the historical events and character developments he was trying to include. By the time 3 full hours had passed and the audience realized there were still 28 minutes left to go, the atmosphere in the theater had shifted from respectful attention to restless endurance. It was at this crucial moment that comedian Mort Sahl, who was known for his sharp political satire and quick wit, decided he had reached his limit with the seemingly endless epic. Sahl stood up from his seat in the middle of the packed theater and shouted out loud enough for everyone to hear, including director Otto Preminger himself. "Otto Preminger, let my people go!" The reference was obviously a play on the famous biblical phrase, "Let my people go," that Moses used when demanding that Pharaoh release the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. But Sahl was using it to express the audience's desire to be released from what felt like their own form of captivity in the movie theater. The incident immediately became legendary Hollywood folklore and is still referenced today whenever people discuss overly long movies. Fact 9. Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint had previously played married teenagers. When audiences watched Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint develop their romantic relationship as Ari Ben Canaan and Kitty Fremont in Exodus, most viewers had no idea that the two actors had already shared the screen as lovers in a completely different project just 5 years earlier. In 1955, both Newman and Saint had appeared together in a television musical adaptation of Thornton Wilder's classic American play, Our Town, where they played the central romantic couple, whose love story forms the heart of that beloved drama. In the television production, Newman took on the role of George Gibbs, the earnest young man who falls in love with his childhood neighbor, while Saint played Emily Webb, the intelligent and spirited girl who becomes the object of his affections. Their characters' relationship progresses from teenage friendship through courtship and eventually to marriage, making them one of the most famous romantic couples in American theater. The story follows George and Emily as they grow up in the fictional small town of Grover's Corners, New Hampshire, dealing with the universal experiences of young love, family expectations, and the passage of time. The 1955 musical version of Our Town gave both actors the opportunity to showcase not only their dramatic abilities, but also their singing voices, as the adaptation included several musical numbers that weren't part of Wilder's original stage play. Newman and Saint's chemistry as the young married couple George and Emily was so convincing that it made perfect sense for casting directors to consider pairing them again in future projects where their established rapport could enhance the believability of their on-screen relationship. This earlier collaboration meant that when they were cast opposite each other in Exodus, Newman and Saint already had a foundation of professional trust and familiarity that helped them develop the complex relationship between their characters. Their previous experience playing lovers who faced tragedy and separation provided useful preparation for the emotionally demanding roles they would tackle in Preminger's epic historical drama. Fact 10. The film accidentally broke the Hollywood blacklist. During the 1940s and 50s, Hollywood operated under a system known as the blacklist, which prevented dozens of writers, directors, and actors from working in the film industry because of their alleged connections to communist organizations or left-wing political activities. Dalton Trumbo was one of the most prominent victims of this blacklist, having been forced to work under fake names and pseudonyms for over a decade after refusing to cooperate with congressional investigations into communist influence in Hollywood. Otto Preminger's decision to hire Trumbo for Exodus wasn't necessarily intended as a political statement or a deliberate attempt to challenge the blacklist system. Instead, Preminger simply wanted the best possible screenwriter for his ambitious project, and Trumbo's talent and experience made him the obvious choice, despite his blacklisted status. When Preminger announced that Trumbo would receive full screen credit under his real name for the first time in more than 10 years, it sent shockwaves through the Hollywood establishment. The timing of this announcement was particularly significant because it happened almost simultaneously with a similar decision by actor and producer Kirk Douglas, who also chose to give Trumbo full credit for his work on the epic film Spartacus. Both Exodus and Spartacus were major big-budget productions backed by major studios, which meant that the decision to openly employ a blacklisted writer couldn't be ignored or dismissed as the action of some minor independent filmmaker. The success of both films proved that audiences didn't care about the political controversies surrounding their screenwriter, and other producers quickly realized that the blacklist was no longer an effective tool for controlling Hollywood's workforce. Within a few years, most of the writers, directors, and actors who had been banned from the industry were able to return to work under their own names. Trumbo later said that breaking the blacklist required the sheer excellence of the work of 2 or 3 blacklisted writers, rather than any organized political campaign. Fact 11. Otto Preminger called the source novel shit. Otto Preminger's relationship with Leon Uris's best-selling novel Exodus was complicated from the very beginning, despite the fact that he had purchased the film rights and was investing millions of dollars to bring the story to the big screen. While Preminger recognized that the book dealt with incredibly important historical events and contained the kind of epic storyline that could make for a powerful and commercially successful movie, he had serious reservations about the quality of Uris's actual writing and storytelling abilities. When Preminger sat down with Dalton Trumbo to discuss the adaptation process, the director was remarkably blunt about his assessment of the source material they would be working with. Preminger told Trumbo in no uncertain terms that he considered the novel to be poorly written, using the crude but unmistakable word shit to describe his opinion of Uris's literary skills. However, in the same conversation, Preminger also acknowledged that despite its literary shortcomings, the book contained extremely interesting subject matter that could serve as the foundation for an important and compelling film. This harsh judgment of the novel's writing quality helps explain why Preminger was so quick to reject Leon Uris's own attempt to adapt his book into a screenplay. When Uris submitted his first draft of the script, Preminger found it to be excessively one-sided in its political perspective and lacking the kind of balanced approach that he felt was necessary for a film that would be seen by audiences around the world. Preminger believed that Uris was too emotionally invested in the story to write an objective screenplay that could present multiple viewpoints on the complex political situation. Preminger's willingness to publicly criticize the source material while simultaneously adapting it demonstrates his confidence that a skilled director and screenwriter could extract the valuable historical content from Uris's novel while improving upon the storytelling techniques and dramatic structure that he felt were lacking in the original book. Fact 12. Jill Haworth's name was constantly mispronounced. When 15-year-old Jill Haworth arrived in Hollywood to begin her career as an actress following her casting in Exodus, she quickly discovered that one of the biggest challenges she would face had nothing to do with memorizing lines, working with famous actors, or adapting to the pressure of being in a major motion picture. Instead, her most persistent problem turned out to be something much more basic: getting people to pronounce her last name correctly. Haworth's surname, which was spelled Haworth, was meant to be pronounced with a short ah sound at the beginning, making it sound like Haworth in the proper British fashion that she had grown up with in England. This pronunciation reflected the traditional English way of speaking the name, which would have been immediately recognizable and unremarkable to anyone familiar with British accents and naming conventions. However, when American directors, producers, casting agents, journalists, and fellow actors encountered her name in writing or heard it pronounced correctly, they consistently struggled to reproduce the proper British pronunciation. Instead of saying Haworth, the way Jill and her family had always pronounced it, Americans invariably turned it into Hayworth, which sounded almost identical to the famous actress Rita Hayworth's last name. No matter how many times Jill corrected people or tried to teach them the right way to say her name, the mispronunciation persisted throughout the Hollywood community. After months of constantly having to correct directors, co-stars, reporters, and industry professionals who continued to call her Hayworth instead of Hayworth, the young actress eventually reached a point of exhaustion with the whole situation. Rather than continue fighting what seemed like an impossible battle against American pronunciation habits, Jill finally decided to give up and simply accept that her name would be pronounced Hayworth for the rest of her career in the United States. This pragmatic decision allowed her to focus on her acting work instead of spending energy on a pronunciation correction that nobody seemed able to remember. Fact 13. Sal Mineo actively pursued a role he didn't look right for. When casting directors and Otto Preminger began looking for an actor to play Dov Landau, the traumatized young Holocaust survivor who becomes a key character in Exodus, they had a very specific physical type in mind based on Leon Uris's description in the original novel. The character was supposed to be a fair-skinned, blue-eyed, blonde Polish Jewish teenager who had survived the horrors of the Warsaw Ghetto and Auschwitz concentration camp, carrying both physical and emotional scars from his experiences under Nazi persecution. Sal Mineo, who was already an established young actor in Hollywood thanks to his breakthrough performance in Rebel Without a Cause, looked nothing like this description. With his dark hair, olive skin, and distinctly Mediterranean features that reflected his Italian-American heritage, Mineo was essentially the physical opposite of what the casting team was seeking for the role of Dov Landau. When industry professionals saw him or considered him for the part, their immediate reaction was that he didn't look Jewish and bore no resemblance whatsoever to the character as written in the novel. Despite these obvious physical differences and the discouraging feedback he received from casting agents and other industry insiders, Mineo refused to give up on the role. He actively pursued the opportunity to audition for Dov Landau, using his connections in Hollywood and his reputation as a talented young performer to get in front of Preminger and demonstrate that he could bring something special to the character that went beyond simple physical resemblance. Mineo's persistence and determination to win the role paid off in a spectacular way. Not only did Preminger ultimately decide to cast him as Dov Landau, but Mineo's powerful performance as the psychologically damaged young survivor became one of the most memorable and emotionally affecting elements of the entire film. His portrayal was so compelling that it earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, which would turn out to be his second and final Oscar nomination of his career. Fact 14. Ernest Gold's theme beat. Legendary competitors for the Oscar. The 1960 Academy Awards ceremony featured one of the most competitive categories in Oscar history when Ernest Gold's musical score for Exodus went head-to-head against some of the most celebrated and memorable film compositions ever created. The Best Music Score category that year included an unprecedented collection of epic themes that would all go on to become classics of cinema music, making Gold's eventual victory even more remarkable given the caliber of his competition. Among the nominated scores that Gold's Exodus theme had to defeat was the powerful and stirring music for Spartacus, composed by Alex North for the Kirk Douglas epic about the famous Roman slave rebellion. North's score was widely praised for its dramatic intensity and perfectly captured the heroic struggle of the gladiators fighting for their freedom against the might of the Roman Empire. Also competing was Dmitri Tiomkin's rousing Western score for The Alamo, John Wayne's epic about the famous battle for Texas independence, which featured memorable themes that captured both the grandeur and tragedy of that historical siege. Perhaps most surprisingly, Gold's Exodus theme also managed to beat Elmer Bernstein's now legendary score for The Magnificent Seven, which would eventually become one of the most recognizable and frequently quoted pieces of Western film music in cinema history. Bernstein's driving, rhythmic theme for The Seven Gunfighters has been used countless times in commercials, television shows, and other movies, making it one of the most commercially successful film themes ever composed. The fact that Ernest Gold's Exodus theme was able to triumph over such distinguished competition speaks to both the quality of his composition and the impact that the film had on audiences and critics in 1960. Gold's sweeping, emotional main theme perfectly captured the epic scope and historical importance of the story, while also becoming a popular hit that reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 when recorded by the piano duo Ferrante and Teicher. Fact 15. The film started as a movie, became a book, then a movie again. The story behind how Exodus came to be created involves one of the most unusual development processes in Hollywood history, where a single project went through a complete circle from film concept to best-selling novel and back to major motion picture again. In 1956, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio executives approached writer Leon Uris with a contract to develop a screenplay about the founding of the modern state of Israel, recognizing that this dramatic historical subject could make for a powerful and commercially successful epic film. Uris threw himself into the research process with tremendous dedication, spending months traveling throughout Israel and interviewing hundreds of people who had lived through the events that led to the country's independence in 1948. He spoke with Holocaust survivors, former British soldiers, Arab residents, Jewish fighters, and political leaders, gathering an enormous amount of first-hand testimony and historical documentation about one of the most significant political developments of the 20th century. However, after Uris had completed his extensive research and begun working on the screenplay, MGM studio executives made the decision to abandon the project entirely. The reasons for this change of direction aren't entirely clear, but the studio may have become concerned about the political sensitivity of the subject matter, or decided that an epic about Middle Eastern politics would be too risky for mainstream American audiences. Rather than let all of his research and hard work go to waste, Uris made the decision to transform his screenplay material into a novel instead. He spent the next 2 years expanding his film treatment into a massive 624-page book that became one of the biggest bestsellers since Gone with the Wind. The novel's enormous success then attracted the attention of Otto Preminger, who purchased the film rights and hired Dalton Trumbo to adapt Uris's book back into the screenplay format where it had originally started, completing the unusual circle from movie concept to novel to finished film.